They said moving into this quiet neighborhood would be a dream. But for one homeowner, it turned into a nightmare the moment the HOA decided to make them a target. What started as a simple disagreement over a harmless detail quickly spiraled into threats, fines, and a campaign of pure harassment. The rules weren't just unfair, they were personal, almost designed to break them down. And just when it seemed impossible to fight back, a shocking twist turned the tables. How far can an HOA go before a homeowner finally snaps? When Mark and his wife first moved into Willow Creek Estates, it felt like the perfect place to finally settle down. The neighborhood was quiet, the lawns were perfectly trimmed, and the rows of houses looked like they had been lifted straight out of a glossy real estate magazine. For years, they had dreamed of a home where their kids could ride their bikes safely down the street, where neighbors waved from their porches, and where weekends were filled with backyard barbecues and laughter. At first, that's exactly what they got. Mark kept his lawn neat, his house freshly painted, and his family respected the rules just like everyone else. They didn't want trouble, all they wanted was peace. But in communities like this, peace has a price. The HOA had its own way of ensuring perfection, and the smallest details could draw unwanted attention. A flower planted outside the approved color scheme, a car parked half an inch over a line, or even a harmless decoration could spark a written warning slipped into a mailbox. For a while, Mark ignored the whispers about the HOA president and her reputation for picking favorites. He told himself that following the rules meant he had nothing to worry about. But as the weeks passed, little signs of tension began to surface. A neighbor gave him a strange look when he put up a simple bird feeder. A letter arrived with a vague reminder about maintaining property standards. It didn't feel serious, not yet. Still, there was a chill in the air, a quiet sense that someone was watching. The fines escalated. First $200, then $500 for leaving a trash can visible for longer than 15 minutes. Then $750 for improper holiday decorations. A single string of lights that Mark had hung early for his children. By now, the letters arrived almost weekly, each one colder and more threatening than the last. Mark attended an HOA meeting, determined to defend himself. But when he spoke, the board members smirked and interrupted him. Mrs. Carter leaned back in her chair, arms folded, her voice sharp as she told him, "The rules apply equally to everyone. If you can't handle that, perhaps this isn't the right community for you." That sentence haunted him. It wasn't about fairness, it was about control. Neighbors began to distance themselves. Where once there had been casual greetings, now there was silence. Mark realized people were afraid that if they sided with him, they would become the next target. And in a twisted way, that isolation made the HOA's power even stronger. But Mark wasn't ready to give up. He carefully documented everything. Every letter, every fine, every photograph slipped under his door. He researched state laws, looking for loopholes in the HOA's authority. Still, the harassment only grew worse. One morning, he woke up to find a bright orange notice taped to his front door. Final warning. Property foreclosure proceedings may be initiated if outstanding fines are not paid. His heart sank. Over a few months, the HOA had stacked more than $5,000 in fines against him. If he didn't pay, they could take his home. That night, he couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling, wondering how his dream house had turned into a prison. He thought of his children, who had stopped inviting friends over out of embarrassment. He thought of his wife, who cried quietly when she thought he wasn't listening. And he thought of Mrs. Carter, whose smug smile at the last meeting made it clear this wasn't about community rules anymore. This was personal. Mark tried one last time to reason with them. He requested a private meeting with the HOA board. Instead, he was met with sneers. They accused him of being hostile, of disrupting harmony in the neighborhood. One board member even suggested that he sell his house and save everyone the trouble. It was in that moment Mark realized he wasn't fighting for grass, decorations, or bird feeders. He was fighting for his right to live in peace without being bullied out of his home. So he changed his strategy. Instead of reacting, he started investigating. He dug into HOA records, discovering questionable expenses and unexplained transfers. He spoke quietly with a former board member who hinted that Mrs. Carter had been bending rules for her own benefit, approving landscaping changes for friends while punishing others for the same thing. The deeper he looked, the more corruption he found. And then came the tipping point. One evening, Mark returned home to find his mailbox ripped open and all his HOA letters scattered across the lawn. His kids had seen it happen, a man with a clipboard, someone they recognized from HOA inspections. Terrified, they refused to play outside anymore. That was the last straw. Mark decided he would no longer play defense. If the HOA wanted a fight, they were about to get one. He began preparing evidence for something bigger, something that would not only clear his name, but expose the board's abuse of power to the entire neighborhood. But before he could take his plan public, the HOA delivered its harshest blow yet. A certified letter threatening immediate legal action and foreclosure unless he paid every cent within 30 days. Mark stared at the notice, his hands trembling. The HOA had backed him into a corner, and he had two choices: surrender his home or launch a counterattack that could change everything. The 30-day deadline loomed over Mark like a storm cloud. Every day that passed felt heavier, the weight of thousands of dollars in fines pressing against his chest. His family's future was no longer just threatened, it was hanging by a thread. And with the HOA's foreclosure notice staring back at him, Mark knew he had nothing left to lose. But if Mrs. Carter and her board thought he would crumble quietly, they had miscalculated. Mark's weeks of quiet preparation had uncovered more than petty rules and intimidation tactics. Hidden inside the HOA's financial records, he discovered inconsistencies: money withdrawn for community projects that never materialized, landscaping budgets that doubled without explanation, and checks written to companies that didn't seem to exist. He wasn't just a disgruntled homeowner anymore. He was holding a stack of evidence that pointed to something much bigger: corruption at the heart of the HOA. The final blow came when he learned that Mrs. Carter herself had authorized thousands of dollars for security upgrades to her own property, conveniently labeled as community safety improvements. It was fraud, plain and simple. Mark decided to strike when the board least expected it, during the next open HOA meeting. That night, the clubhouse was packed. Homeowners filled the folding chairs, some curious, others irritated, but most resigned to the usual routine of Carter's smug leadership. Mark sat quietly near the back, a folder clutched in his hands, his heart pounding like a drum. The meeting began predictably. Mrs. Carter stood at the front, her voice sharp and commanding as she rattled off agenda items: budget adjustments, maintenance fees, compliance enforcement. Each phrase was laced with bureaucratic authority, the kind that made people tune out. Then came the moment Mark had been waiting for. When the floor opened for homeowner concerns, he rose slowly to his feet. Dozens of eyes turned toward him. Mrs. Carter's smile froze. "I'd like to address the board," Mark said firmly, his voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through him. "And I'd like the entire community to hear this." Carter tried to cut him off. "This isn't the time for—" But Mark didn't back down. He raised the folder high. "For months, my family has been targeted with fines, threats, and harassment. But while you were busy policing bird feeders and Christmas lights, I was busy looking into something else: your finances." A murmur rippled through the room. People leaned forward, suddenly alert. Mark pulled out copies of the documents he had gathered and began reading aloud. $12,400 for community landscaping improvements. But the company paid was registered to your brother-in-law. $7,800 for security systems, yet the only upgrades were installed at your personal home. And let's not forget the thousands of dollars in unexplained transfers labeled as miscellaneous expenses. Gasps filled the room. Some homeowners exchanged shocked looks, others glared at the board members. Mrs. Carter's face flushed crimson. "This is nonsense," she snapped, her voice cracking under the pressure. "These accusations are baseless, out of order." But Mark didn't stop. He slammed down photographs, receipts, and official records on the table for everyone to see. His voice grew stronger with each word. You threatened to take my home over so-called violations. You fine me for bird feeders and holiday lights. But the truth is, you've been stealing from every single person in this neighborhood. The room erupted. Homeowners began shouting, demanding answers. The board members whispered furiously among themselves, but the crowd was no longer on their side. For the first time, Mrs. Carter's control was slipping. Mark delivered his final blow. I've already submitted this evidence to the county auditor and the state attorney's office. So whether you deny it here tonight or not, the investigation has already begun. The silence that followed was deafening.